Lewis Hamilton's 2024 season has gone off to the worst possible start, as he's yet to finish in the top 5 and had to swallow his dignity in Japan to let his teammate pass in the very early stages of the race. The statements coming from the 7-time world champion are not encouraging either, with Mercedes bringing a brand new basis to work on, and while the team acknowledged it's a lot more stable to bring upgrades on, so far we've seen nothing of it. But the real question is, has Hamilton already given up on helping his team in the last year of their contractual obligations? And more importantly, will this cost Mercedes a lot for the upcoming campaign as well? It goes without saying that Hamilton is one of the unhappiest drivers in the grid right now, rightfully so. Being P9 in the Constructors' Championship with only 10 points to your name while your teammate has 14 points more is not really something you want to endure as a 7-time world champion who was dominating the sport not that long ago. But when Hamilton was constantly warning Mercedes that things would come to this point after chasing the wrong design, they turned a deaf ear to him, and even the engineers admitted that they were in the wrong for not listening to him when they should have. This is not the first time that Hamilton has not been listened to after the 2021 fiasco in Abu Dhabi. It was clearly not his wish to have a competitive driver in Russell as his teammate in the quest for the 8th championship, so while the destiny for the young Brit was already signed off for Mercedes, the 7-time world champion insisted on keeping Bottas, and he mentioned that a couple of times throughout the past couple of years. I'm only mentioning these things as a build-up story to what comes next, Hamilton's ultimate dissatisfaction with Mercedes and how the W15, even though made by his own wishes and desires, is still failing to achieve the results that Mercedes would have wanted it to. Lewis Hamilton went on to talk about the car, and although his statements shifted from one of the best cars on the grid when talking about it on Friday to the worst car he's ever driven in his career when it matters the most, Saturday and Sunday, it's obvious that Mercedes have stuck themselves in a path that is very tough to get out of. Building a competitive car in the 3rd consecutive season under the same regulations while changing the entire narrative around the challenger. On top of that, they had to accept the brutal fate of Hamilton, who decided to join Ferrari months before even trying out the W15, which now sounds like the most reasonable thing to do from his side, considering that he's by far in the worst form of his career, and that is something that we can hardly blame him for. When talking about the current situation Hamilton is in, further fueled by the journalists' questions about whether or not he's happy to see his future team Ferrari progressing forward, something to which Hamilton asked if there are any better questions coming in and stormed out of the room, the 7-time world champion said, "This is the worst start of the season I have ever had, and it's worse than 2009. It is tough on the spirits for everyone in the team when you see how much work has gone on throughout the winter. You come in excited, motivated and driven. You have the mindset that you're going to be fighting for wins, and obviously that is not the case. And then you're like, okay, maybe we'll fight for 2nd or 3rd. No, it's not the case." To put things into perspective, the 2009 season, one that was dubbed to be Hamilton's worst in his fruitful career and that will take a massive turn next year, was mainly due to McLaren missing out on huge downforce targets, similar to what happens with Mercedes right now. And back then, the reasons were a lot more justified, to say the least, because the team missed out on exploiting the loophole that made the double diffuser possible. And even in that situation, Hamilton statistically scored more points compared to 2024. The demotivation is quite present in Hamilton's voice, and as I mentioned earlier in this video, you cannot blame him a single bit for what happened with the current worst start to the Mercedes season. His car is the only one undergoing a lot of changes and experiments throughout the weekends, and even when he and the Mercedes fans begged the team to not touch the car from Japan's free practice sessions, when Hamilton said it was one of the best cars he had driven on the grid, Wolff admitted that they still did some experiments on Hamilton's car. This was one of the primary reasons why the 7-time world champion had to let Russell go ahead of him due to the lack of pace, and once he understood that the tires were eating up too fast, he went on to unleash his anger on the race engineer Bono to change the strategy because it's clearly not working. This is yet another indicator of Hamilton's dissatisfaction with Mercedes. He's not trusting his team or the engineers in it, even though they've made a lot of changes that he requested, primarily revolving around the position of the cockpit, which was moved 100mm backwards in order to have a better feel with the rear of the car. What this goes to show is that either Hamilton's feedback is not proper, which is a very thin scenario to believe in considering the fact that Wolff and the engineers spoke about how Hamilton was in the right with the concept, or the second scenario, which is a lot more likely to be believed in, is that the team has failed to capitalize on successful feedback from a 7-time world champion and relied more on Russell, who managed to extract more performance out of the W13 and were further worsened by the 1-2 finish in Brazil in 2022. A huge issue that we must not overlook is the issue that Mercedes has had with correlating the data from the simulator to its on-track performance. This is something that Wolff has spoken about, saying that at certain corners in Melbourne, the on-track data said that they could have had as much as 70 downforce points more than what they originally had, which is around 1 to 1.5 seconds of performance. It's either the fact that Wolff needs to keep a lot of people satisfied in Brackley, or that they have a genuine discrepancy between the information that they're receiving from the track and the ones in the simulator, which is another huge obstacle when it comes to improving the current performance of the car. Obviously, driving styles are also brought into question here, because from the third season in which Hamilton and Russell are teammates, we could understand that Hamilton enjoys driving a car that is a lot more stable and predictable, which while many would concede is a negative trait because it basically means he cannot be competitive in a bad performing car. You cannot really hope to win races and championships relying on a car that has questionable design and performance, which was more or less what Mercedes was in 2022 and 2023. 2024 did not seem to prove any better, and when talking about this matter further, Hamilton went on to say, "It is 3 years in a row of a similar feeling. Then there are these spikes of it could be good, then it disappears. If we can find a way of keeping that goodness in the car, making it more consistent and holding on to that, we can be more competitive." But it's not all that sad of a future for Hamilton. The 7-time world champion said that the car still has a lot more potential, and although his destiny beyond 2024 is already known, that doesn't mean he will give up on this campaign. After all, he has won so many races and podiums in his career that you would barely expect from him to just lift off the gas and fight for scrap points, even though the first 4 races of the season suggested that he might have to be prepared for this scenario, which will be prepared for him by Mercedes. When talking about the upcoming future of the car, more precisely the first aerodynamic upgrade package that will come in Imola, trackside engineer Andrew Chauvelin was adamant that the car's stable platform will enable them to unlock more performance. And although the team does not fully understand the current concept, it doesn't mean that it's the wrong one. Something they've been able to understand from the first couple of races in the past couple of years. Adding further to this matter, Chauvelin went on to say, "The big program we were looking at was to try and get the car a bit more predictable through the weekend. What we found is that we can get it in a window, but if the wind changes and the track temperature changes, it quickly falls out of it. And that was leading to poor performances in races and qualifying. Now there is no doubt that we are not where we need to be at the moment. We know that, and we know that we've got work to do. But certainly working with the car across the weekend was easier. The balance of the car was more consistent." With all this in mind, do you think that Hamilton will give up on the current season and literally stop trying his best because he knows there's little or nothing to be achieved, as Mercedes is currently P4 in the Constructors' Championship, fiercely fighting for this position with Aston Martin? Let us know in the comments below.